Severin, you were talking previously on your earnings call about your confidence in your antibody tests that you're going to roll out, in a couple of weeks? Talk to me about how these tests will be used to help us fight the spread of the pandemic.
Antibody tests are very important in the fight of this coronavirus pandemic for two reasons. First, they help us to better understand how infections develop in a certain population. And secondly, there is good reason to believe that antibody tests show you whether you have developed immunity after you have been infected. As far as Roche is concerned, we will launch a highly reliable test at the beginning of May. And the good news is, due to this technology, we will be able to ramp up testing very quickly to the high double millions of tests already by June.
Severin Schwan, good morning to you. It's Anna in London, and sitting here in London, I'm aware that many governments have spent money already on antibody tests that proved not to work. What sets yours apart? What is different about the Roche antibody test that means it will be worth buying?
Human beings, we all develop different antibodies for all kinds of coronaviruses. So it is very important to pick the right test and then to validate those tests with enough patients. And unfortunately, there is a number of tests already out there in the market which are not reliable simply because they haven't been tested sufficiently. That's also why it took us a little bit of time to launch our own test, because we had to find the right antibody test. We had to test it and validate it with enough patients. But from the data, we now know that we are able to bring such a reliable, precise test to the market very soon.
Severin, with the molecular testing, there have been bottlenecks that really fouled things up. Not enough Q-tips around, reagents hard to find. Are you going to see, or are you concerned about bottlenecks like that holding back, scaling up of these antibody tests?
For antibody tests, which is a proven technology which is widely adopted, scale-up will be much easier. Molecular diagnostics is much more complicated, and indeed the supply is limited. This will be different for antibody tests. So over time, I'm very confident that the industry, not only us, also some of our peers, will be able to meet demand.
So if we think about the antibody tests as telling us whether a person has some immunity, Severin, how should governments around the world plan to use these antibody tests to lift lockdown measures? And how soon could lockdown measures be lifted if we have full-scale antibody testing?
We are already talking with governments exactly about that question, and the general understanding is that you would first focus antibody testing on really critical professions, for example, healthcare workers who are at the front line, who are most exposed. And from there, you start to expand to broader populations.
Why is the vaccine taking so long? Now not expected maybe until later in 2021. What's holding back that development?
Well, typically the development of a vaccine takes several years. Now, companies who are involved in the development of vaccines, which we are not as a company, they would tell you that it takes at least 12 to 18 months to bring out a vaccine. I personally think this is very ambitious. You do not only have to develop the vaccine, you have to test it sufficiently with patients, and then importantly, it has to be ramped up. Again, if you compare to how long it took in the past, 12 to 18 months seems a very ambitious timeline to me.
So that's the timeline that you see at the moment, Severin. What about Actemra? This is an arthritis medication that you make that I understand you've been using in testing to see if it can help those suffering from COVID-19 to alleviate some of the inflammation. What kind of success is that having? What kind of difference is that going to make to the sales of this drug?
Right. So what we have seen is with severely ill COVID-19 pneumonia patients, that often there's an overreaction of the immune system, and Actemra helps to dampen the immune system. And we have certain evidence from China, from Italy, from Spain, now also from the US, that Actemra helps in such situations. And as a consequence, a number of countries have adopted Actemra in their treatment guidelines. We are now doing a randomized clinical trial to get even more robust data. We expect results in June, and then we'll take it from there.
How much longer do you think there's going to be demand for these products that you're putting so much effort into developing, Severin? I mean, if you don't think if you think 12 to 18 months is ambitious, do you think you're going to be needing to produce these tests and these medicines throughout 2021, 2022, maybe longer?
At any rate, I believe we have a responsibility to be ready for such scenarios. And that's why we are investing at risk. We do not know yet if at all and when the vaccines will come to the market. We all hope they come very quickly, but it could well happen that it takes longer. And in such a situation, testing and also other medicines to treat the consequences of the infections will be very important. That's why we are investing at risk. And then it will all depend. It will depend on the clinical trial results. We still have to see how good the various medicines are actually working. And it will depend, of course, of the further evolution of the pandemic.
Your results that you report today, Severin, seem to be better than expected in some cases, but in many cases. But are there any signs that maybe other drugs far away from COVID-19, nothing to do with coronavirus, other drugs, maybe are we going to see those not being sold in such large quantities into the future because maybe patients just simply don't present with other things, that there isn't the funding for other things? Is there any concern within the business about that?
Well, if we look at our portfolio, the business has been very resilient, but you make a very important point, and we also see that in our portfolio, and that is in particular for chronic diseases. Patients are simply afraid to go to the hospital or to the doctor because they are afraid of being infected by COVID-19. And as a result of that, actually, they are undertreated and will suffer from the consequences. So I do believe from a public healthcare point of view, we have to keep an eye on that. And let's don't forget, the vast majority of people die from other diseases than COVID-19.
Severin, from a public health point of view, what lessons have we learned? What notes should governments be taking on how to deal with the spread of pandemics like this?
I mean, one lesson which is very, very clear is on the testing side in particular, which is so important for pandemics and viral pandemics. Is you need a good testing infrastructure. It's not as simple as to simply order some tests and then you test everybody. You need a very robust infrastructure. You need labs. You need qualified personnel. You need all the different components which come together. You need instruments, etc. So I clearly see that those countries which have invested early enough in a robust testing infrastructure, they are now able to test their population, and those countries which have not invested in such an infrastructure, they are really struggling. We are helping them as much as we can, 24/7 to ramp up. But there's only so much possible. So one of the learnings clearly is in the longer term to get a better infrastructure for the testing in our healthcare systems.
And what about your business, Severin, and the way it is being changed by a coronavirus? Do you see it as being permanently changed by this pandemic?
Well, first of all, I'm extremely proud of all our employees and what they are contributing today. We talk so much about the everyday heroes at the front line, and our people and colleagues in operations are certainly part of this category. I mean, working 24/7 over Easter, over weekends to ramp up production and to ensure supply. In terms of our overall business strategy, certainly what we see is now the importance of diagnostics. We will continue to invest into that. I think the recent events have shown how important that is. But let's don't forget about all the other many important diseases we want to tackle, like cancer, neurological diseases, etc. So we will keep investing in those areas beyond COVID-19 as well.